The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the Grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Monty'man.
Well, welcome one and all. Welcome, family. Walking Through the Language of the Heart. This wonderful book, by the way, features all of AA co-founder Bill W.'s writings in the Grapevine, what members of AA refer to as their meeting in print, from 1944 to 1970. This book includes how Bill came to organize AA's 12 Steps, his first thoughts about the program's 12 traditions, emotional and spiritual growth, and much more. And it is our pleasure to bring this show to you. On the phone with me is my co-host, Chris S. Hey, Chris.
Hey, what's happening, Monty? How are you?
I am excellent, and I'm excited for this episode. This is our fourth episode, episode number 4. In the journey of many.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying this. And one of the reasons is, and I say it every week, is I'm such a fan of Bill Wilson's writings. It's so pertinent and topical for if you're an alcoholic, man, you don't read this stuff. It reads you.
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just really, really powerful. And so tonight we're on page 13. We're going to be reading, the name of the article is A Tradition Born of Our Anonymity. And it was written in January 1946. And I'm going to do the first paragraph here. It says, in the years that lie ahead, the principle of anonymity will undoubtedly become part of our vital tradition. Even today, we sense its practical value. But more important still, we are beginning to feel that the word anonymous has for us an immense spiritual significance. Subtly, but powerfully, it reminds us that we are always to place principles before personalities, that we have renounced personal glorification in public, and that our movement not only preaches, but actually practices true, humble modesty. That the practice of anonymity in our public relations has already had a profound effect upon us, and upon our millions of friends in the outside world, there can hardly be doubt. Anonymity is already a cornerstone of our public relations policy. Now, I've had a kind of a theory, Monty, about anonymity, because I've studied some of the history, and it's kind of dawned on me that in the very beginning, they talk about the reason for anonymity. And the reason for anonymity was because they were afraid that they were going to get so overwhelmed with alcoholics looking for help that, 500 people a day were going to end up on their doorstep or something, and it was going to be completely unmanageable. That's a very, very valid reason, But I think it broadened and deepened. The concept of anonymity broadened and deepened. And reading some of the history, and especially some of the non-conference approved history, I've got a theory about how it slowly transitioned to to what it is today, which is it's a principle of anonymity. It's a principle of humility. And I think it had a lot to do with some of the problems Bill had in the early days with other members and other friends of Alcoholics Anonymous. There was a period of time, Monty, where people were going after him. They really thought that he was scamming things in New York. He was gathering up money. He was collecting dues. What's he doing with this money? Hank Parkhurst turned on him after he relapsed.
Yeah.
Went out to Akron and Cleveland and got people like Clarence Snyder and Henrietta Seiberling to turn against Bill. And I think this early controversy, the early conflict that happened with different people, gave Bill the idea that this could never be run by anyone. No one should have more than one vote. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There should only be leaders, or there should only be trusted servants and not leaders. And he started to morph into the tradition 11 and tradition 12 that you read in the 12 steps and 12 traditions. It moved from trying to protect you from having 500 people on your doorstep to basically being a personal thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually, it's referred to as a spiritual foundation, right?
It's a spiritual foundation. You're absolutely correct. And I also think as he matured in his recovery, he really recognized that it was something he was going to absolutely have to develop within himself. I've felt that, as the decades have gone by in recovery, I've really felt that, my spirituality has to mellow out. My ego has to reduce. My self-centeredness has to, be reduced. And I've got to be more right-sized and more centered. So, we're going to be talking a little bit about this anonymity, and, I wanted to preface it with a little bit of that stuff.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think that this attitude of we come into the rooms and we start learning about this wonderful thing that is rescuing us from the bondage of active alcoholism, and we start getting excited and we do service work, and all of a sudden our ego kind of steps in, and we notice that people are doing things maybe not exactly the way the book says, and so we become the savior of the traditions, and you know how it goes, right?
Sure, you become an evangelist.
Yeah, you do.
And I went through that. You went through
Absolutely.
that. Absolutely. I think if you don't go through that, you've missed something. But hopefully you mature out. You go from the bleeding deacon to the elder statesman.
Yes.
You morph into somebody who can become a little bit detached from the quite obvious dysfunction that happens within the rooms of any 12-step organization.
Sure.
So it says how this idea first originated and subsequently took hold of us is an interesting bit of AA history. In the years before the publication of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, we had no name. Nameless, formless, our essential principles of recovery still under debate and test. We were just a group of drinkers groping our way along what we hoped would be the road to freedom. Once we became sure that our feet were set on the right track, we decided upon a book in which we could tell other alcoholics the good news. There's so many biblical, you know what I mean, biblical parallels. Sorry, agnostics, but there just is. As the book took form, we inscribed in it the essence of our experience. It was the product of thousands of hours of discussion. It truly represented the collective voice, heart, and conscience of those who had pioneered the first 4 years of AA. And again, it was, he's saying that it was the product of thousands of hours of discussion. Now, that does not mean people helped write the book. It does not mean that there was people going over chapters and giving Bill advice on how to better state the principles in the book. There was one person writing this book. Mm-hmm. There was one person typing it, and there was one person looking over his shoulder, and that was Hank Parkhurst. There was no input from Akron on the big book, and there was no input from many of the other group members in New York. No one really bought into the writing of this book except Bill and Hank and Fitz and Ruth and maybe a handful of other people. But so when he talks about it's the collective voice and hundreds of hours of discussion, he's not talking about they're sitting around the table putting the big book together. He's the one that did that.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point because I think people think otherwise. I think they think that there was exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, what would happen is Bill would certainly send chapters to Dr. Bob as they were being written. Mm-hmm. He would send him a chapter, and Dr. Bob would send a message back, "Looks good to me, Bill."
Yeah.
That's the input, that's right. The collaborative effort. I'm not sure the people in Akron, had a lot of confidence that this was going to become anything like it became. Sure. It became the basic text of the fellowship. And, I know Bill, that was Bill's idea, and Bill drove that thing home, and he had Hank, the great promoter, pushing it all the way. But Bill tends to like to paint a more collaborative picture sometimes than really existed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As the day of publication approached, we racked our brains to find a suitable name for the volume. We must have considered at least 200 titles. Thinking up titles and voting upon them at meetings became one of our main activities. A great welter of discussion and argument finally narrowed our choice to a single pair of names. Should we call our new book The Way Out, or should we call it Alcoholics Anonymous? That was the final question. A last-minute vote was taken by the Akron and New York groups. By a narrow majority, the verdict was for naming our book The Way Out. Just before we went to print, somebody suggested that there might be other books having the same title. One of our early loan members, dear old Fitz Mayo, who then lived in Washington, went over to the Library of Congress to investigate. He found exactly 12 books already titled The Way Out. When this information was passed around, we shivered at the possibility of being the 13th way out. So Alcoholics Anonymous became the first choice. That's how we got a name for our book of experience, a name for our movement. And we are now beginning to see a tradition of the greatest spiritual import. God does move in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. And there's also some additional information on that story. So there's this hospital, Monty, and it's in Morris Plains, New Jersey, and I've actually done commitments there. It's not a great place to do commitments. It's a mental hospital. It is an old school asylum, and Bill and Hank and some people they would drive out there, to try to find alcoholics to work with because back then they'd put you in an asylum.
Yeah.
And it says in the big book, you're going to get locked up or you're going to die if you're a hopeless alcoholic. So there was a lot of people who, got locked up there because they just couldn't be left alone on the streets as alcoholic as they were. So he was going to this hospital, Greystone Hospital, and they have a little meeting going on, and they look over, and there's this guy rocking. He's like curled up in a fetal position, and he's rocking. He's like banging his head against the wall. You see a lot of that in this particular hospital, right? And he's mumbling. And so somebody says, hey, that guy's been mumbling the whole meeting. What the hell is he saying? And somebody goes over there really close, and they said, he's saying anonymous alcoholics, anonymous alcoholics, anonymous alcoholics.
Wow.
And so that's the an oral an oral story that dates back to when I was listening to as many of the tapes of the first 100 as I could get my hands on.
Uh-huh.
And so that's another piece to that story. Bill paints the bright colors when he talks about history. He rarely gets into the darker shades. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, that stuff's rich though. I love it when we find that stuff out. That's great.
Yeah, I know you agree with me. I'm glad there was a lot of craziness and a lot of characters and a lot of wacky things going on. It just makes me feel more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel more like part of the family, man.
yeah, absolutely. So in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, there are only 3 references to the principle of anonymity. The foreword of our first edition states, being mostly business or professional folk, some of us could not carry on our occupations if known. And when writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to admit his personal name, designating himself a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then, very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. And remember what I said about one of the early purposes of anonymity.
Wasn't it true though? I'm wondering if this is one of those areas where he's painting bright colors, because wasn't it true a lot of these guys had lost their jobs anyway?
Yeah, it was like the Depression era, and there was not a lot of money, not a lot of work. If you could find work,
yeah,
you'd be making like 5 cents a day. I mean, I'm not exaggerating.
Right.
And so most people chose to just get by as best they can, without a lot of without a lot of people being employed. There were people that had jobs. I'm not saying that there wasn't, but for the most part, they did not have jobs. So that's one of the first reasons for for the principle of anonymity. And they really, especially Bill, thought this thing was going to take off faster than it actually did.
Right.
But since the publication of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1939, hundreds of AA groups have been formed. Every one of them asks these questions. Just how anonymous are we supposed to be? And after all, what good is this principle of anonymity anyway? To a great extent, each group has settled upon its own interpretation. Naturally enough, each group has settled upon, I read that. Naturally enough, wide differences of opinion remain among us. Just what our anonymity means and just how far it ought to go are unsettled questions. This is 1945. Mm-hmm. It became more and more settled as he did more writing.
Yeah.
Though we no longer fear the stigma of alcoholism as we once did, we still find individuals who are extremely sensitive about their connection with us. A few come in under assumed names. Others swear us to deepest secrecy. They fear their connection with Alcoholics Anonymous may ruin their business or social position. At the other end of the scale of opinion, we have the individual who declares that anonymity is a lot of childish nonsense. He feels it's his bound duty to cry his membership in Alcoholics Anonymous from the housetops. Now, he points out that our AA fellowship contains people of renown, some of national importance. Why, he asks, shouldn't we capitalize on their personal prestige just as any other organization would? And sometimes they even tried that in the early days. But there were some people, in Akron, basically Clarence Snyder, who really thought their traditions were crap. Especially the anonymity tradition, because Clarence would put ads in the paper, alcohol problem, call Clarence Snyder. There was all kinds of stuff. There was all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah.
and Bill is just kind of hanging back. He's watching. He's trying to see what's going to work and what isn't. He's got a loyalty to this organization that he's really trying to guide, and I think he's seeing this. I think he's paying attention to the stuff that needs to get paid attention to, and he understood that you could get a power driver. We've all seen him in meetings. They're 4 weeks sober and they want to change all the they want to change everything.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Why are you doing it like this? Why are you doing it like that? It's just I'll tell you a story. A buddy of mine was on a 12-step call and he told me the story. And this is typical Alcoholics Anonymous, right? This woman was on such a run that when they finally got into her apartment, dragged her off and put her into a treatment program, the apartment was so trashed and it was a rental, that there were maggots in the refrigerator, and they had to replace the refrigerator for the owner of the house. I mean, they literally had to put a brand new refrigerator in because it was filled with maggots. And about 2 weeks into the treatment program, she starts complaining about the food.
Oh, that's classic.
Tell me if that's not us.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I heard another good one. I'm completely going out on a limb here. I heard another one that I love. This guy calls up his sponsor. He's 6 months sober. So he goes, man, you're not going to believe it. I completed a puzzle in 45 minutes. And the sponsor goes, what? Why is that supposed to impress me?
Right.
He goes, on the box it said 2 to 4 years.
Oh my gosh. Oh boy. That's great. That's a great story.
I'm sorry, buddy.
No, that is really rich.
Okay, it says in between these extremes, the shades of opinion are legion. Some groups, especially newer ones, conduct themselves like secret societies. They do not wish their activities known even to friends, nor do they propose to have preachers, doctors, or even their wives at any of their meetings. As for inviting in newspaper reporters, perish the thought. Other groups feel that their communities should know all about Alcoholics Anonymous. Though they print no names, they do seize every opportunity to advertise the activities of their group. They occasionally hold public or semi-public meetings where AAs appear on the platform by name. Doctors, clergy, and public officials are frequently invited to speak at such gatherings. Here and there, a few AAs have dropped their anonymity completely. Their names, pictures, and personal activities have appeared in the public prints. As AAs, they have sometimes signed their names to articles telling of their membership. So while it is quite evident that most of us believe in anonymity, our practice of the principle does vary a great deal. Now, you and I have talked over the years, Monty. My belief in anonymity is it really needs to be understood for what it truly means to the individual and to the groups.
Yes.
And to AA as a whole. Anonymity does not mean secrecy.
Yeah.
There are people that believe that anonymity means they can tell no one of their membership. And that's not really true. They just shouldn't tell, press, radio, TV, and film. They shouldn't break their anonymity at that level. Our 12-step work requires us to break our anonymity. We're supposed to break. How are we going to get into a prison to bring a meeting into prison without giving our last name?
You can't.
You know what I mean? How are we going to get insurance or make a deal with a church to provide meeting space without giving our last name?
Right.
How are we to do that? So, and we're supposed to search out the alcoholic. We're not supposed to wait for them to come to us. I know you have a treatment commitment. I've got a treatment commitment. We go out and we carry the message to people who've not asked us to come.
That's right.
Because that's what the 12-step asks us to do. And so anonymity does not mean secrecy. It means humility. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And I remember when the video Anonymous People first came out. Man, it was like the room was divided at my home group. It was just like what we're reading here, that the differences of opinion on anonymity were far-reaching, right? And boy, there were some arguments that broke out over that thing. Another thing that I witnessed was a kind of a power driver guy, one of the guardians of the traditions, if you will, was saying they were getting ready to re-sign a lease on the building that they were renting, and he says you can't sign that. You're going to have somebody else sign it that's not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You can't use your full name. And I thought, what? How are you going to have somebody who's not part of the organization that's leasing it sign it? That you can't. How does that work? And I don't know. I don't remember what happened. Somebody must have signed it, but I remember there was a big up-to-do about that. And it's almost like we can get into these discussions and totally forget about our primary purpose, and that's sad.
Yeah, let's create a reason to be lazy, and not have to go to hospitals, treatment centers, jails, courts, insane asylums. Let's figure out how not to do that. I know we're anonymous. and that's a real recipe for failure. I was part of a home group for a long time, and the home group had a membership list. And any member, and you're a member if you say you are. You give them your full name, your phone number, your address, everything. It had everything on it. Now that worked really well right up until it didn't work really well. What happened was there was a veterans program that would literally send everybody in their program to our AA meeting, and one of those guys took the meeting list, and what he did with it was he started calling all the women and started to do really, really obscene phone calls.
Oh boy!
And the women figured it out because they would talk to each other. Oh, I got this terrible phone call. Oh, so did I. So I happen to know a private investigator who can figure out phone numbers and figure out where it's coming from and all that stuff. And we tracked it to this guy's father's house. He had left the program and he'd gone home to live with his parents, and from his parents he was making these obscene phone calls. And what that did was it screwed up a lot of people's confidence in having a full-blown list like that, especially with addresses. So that changed, that changed. But we still had the person's name, last initial and phone number. And you have to be able to find each other.
Right.
So, for commitments or whatever. So anyway, that's kind of a story from my personal experience.
I remember seeing a phone list go around one time, and somebody had wrote their full name on there, and the next person down on the list had scratched out the other guy's last name and put his initial, and then he wrote his name and last initial. And I thought, wow, that's the ultimate control, right? I'm gonna take over your.
I'm in charge of this guy's anonymity.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Listen, you see all kinds of things.
All sorts
you
of stuff.
see all kinds of things in the rooms. I think you should. It's a growing environment.
Yeah, the family be crazy.
Absolutely. So it says, of course, it should be the privilege, even the right of each individual or group to handle anonymity as they wish. But to do that intelligently, we shall need to be convinced that the principle is a good one. For practically all of us, indeed, we must realize that the future safety and effectiveness of Alcoholics Anonymous may depend on its preservation. Each individual will then have to decide where he ought to draw the line, how far he ought to carry the principle in his own affairs, how far he may go in dropping his own anonymity without injury to Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. And again, we have more of a right to break our anonymity than Alcoholics Anonymous has a right to punish us for doing so. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These are best practices, and it's like a self-cleaning oven. You break enough of you bend or break enough of these principles, and you're going to burn off of this thing.
Yeah,
you're not going to be around. There's a guy in Texas who it's his hobby. What he does is he discovers people, famous people, usually actors or musicians who've broken their anonymity. Not just said, I'm in recovery or I quit drinking, but actually, broke their anonymity by saying they're now going to AA. And he tracks those people, and well over 90% of them relapse.
Wow.
I know a number of cases. There was this comedian, who was one of the funniest guys I ever heard, Sam Kinison.
Oh yeah.
He breaks his anonymity and he's dead in a month. You know what I mean? It's just, it's really bad karma.
Yeah.
To do that.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of people who've broken their anonymity, and are still around. The people that are still around with long-term recovery, we all know a bunch of them,
sure,
are usually really low key when they're, on TV or being in an interview or whatever. They're really low key about not stating their membership in Alcoholics Anonymous, but they will say they're in long-term recovery. They quit drinking in 1984. Their life has never been better. They say a lot of things that are not anonymity breaks.
You betcha.
The vital question is just where shall we fix this point where personalities fade out and anonymity begins? As a matter of fact, few of us are anonymous so far as our daily contacts go. We have dropped anonymity at this level because we think our friends and associates ought to know about Alcoholics Anonymous and what it has done for us. We also wish to lose the fear of admitting that we are alcoholics. Though we earnestly request reporters not to disclose our identities, we frequently speak before semi-public gatherings under our right names. We wish to impress audiences that our alcoholism is a sickness we no longer fear to discuss before anyone. So far, so good. If, however, we venture beyond this limit, we shall surely lose the principle of anonymity forever. If every AA felt free to publish his own name, picture, and story, we would soon be launched upon a vast orgy of personal publicity, which obviously could have no limit whatever. Isn't this where, by the strongest kind of attraction, we must draw the line? It's funny. When I first started coming around, what Alcoholics Anonymous would do is it would send all the newspapers, all the publications in a certain area. Every year they would send an anonymity statement, and they would request if someone breaks their anonymity, please respect our tradition of anonymity and don't use their last name or picture. So we were asking the media to help basically police this tradition of anonymity. And these letters would go out every year. I don't know if they still do, Monty, but the media is a different animal today.
Sure it is.
Yeah. It's everything is fair game.
Right.
You know that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's as tight of a net anymore. I think if someone wants to break their anonymity at the public level, it would take them 2 seconds to do so.
Yeah.
If I were asked to outline a tradition for anonymity, it might run as follows. 1, it should be the privilege of each individual AA to cloak himself with as much personal anonymity as he desires. Like if there's a new guy, Monty, and I bump into him in the grocery store or something, I do not run up and say hi to him. I'll look at him, and he'll look at me, but I'm not comfortable running up and saying hi because he's with his family or whatever, and they're going to say, who's that? Right. Dad,
Yeah.
And I know that newcomers can be touchy. Now, if I bump into you at a supermarket, it'd be like, Monty,
Right. You bet. Hey,
am I going to see you tonight at the Looney, the Looney Tunes meeting? It just be different.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But I try to respect until I know what someone's limit is or comfortability is. I'm real careful. Number 2, conversely, the individual AA ought to respect the feelings of his local group as to anonymity. If his group wishes to be more anonymous than he does, he ought to go along with them until they change their views. And I'll go back to the group, having a group conscience and saying we're taking our last names and our addresses off of the group list. And
sure.
You know what? That got voted in, and nobody had an issue with it.
Right.
Let's follow the group. Number 3, with very rare exceptions, it ought to be a national tradition that no member of Alcoholics Anonymous shall ever feel free to publish his name or picture in connection with his Alcoholics Anonymous activities in any medium of public circulation or by radio. Of course, this should not restrict the free use of his name in other public activities, provided he does not disclose his AA connection. So on your show, I'm Chris S. There's no picture. Right. I'm following the anonymity tradition, and I've never had one person send me a nasty message saying, "What are you doing breaking your anonymity?" Because I'm not.
Right.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
And so this is probably a good place for me to bring this up. So I have been challenged with that. As the owner and operator of Take 12 Recovery Radio.
Sure.
It happened early on. It was in the first couple of years of us doing this, because quite frankly, nobody was doing this yet, to the degree that we were. And right. So it was kind of like, okay, what's up with that? So I had gotten a call from back east, people around here. I mean, what are you doing? You're breaking the anonymity tradition, blah, blah. And I made it a point, and some people may try, but I have never claimed membership in any specific program. You cannot find in any of my broadcasts where I say what fellowship I'm a member of. Now, I may say something like, I went to a 12-step meeting and I heard somebody say this amazing quote. It was wonderful, but I've never claimed membership, and I don't mention what the meeting was. I just don't do that. I try to protect it, and even though Take 12 Radio is not affiliated with any particular 12-step program, I want to respect those traditions as the owner of Take 12 Recovery Radio, and ask our guests, look at. If you want to discuss your specific membership in the fellowship you're in, we ask you politely to use your last initial. If you're not going to say what it is, we ask that you do whatever you want, And so that's one of the reasons why I'm referred to, my radio title or handle is the Monty'man. I have my last name in a couple of places that are required just by registration of the nonprofit and all that. But you won't hear me say which. Now people try to figure it out, and I'm not going to tell them if they're right or wrong.
Well, Monty, what you just shared with me is totally within the confines of the traditions of anonymity, as far as my perspective. 100%. How can somebody accuse you of breaking your anonymity in a fellowship you don't admit you're in?
Right.
That would not make any sense.
Yeah.
But and listen, who polices this stuff anyway? You get somebody who's trying to police this stuff, and that's a break of 15 spiritual principles.
Right.
That's someone who's still playing God.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, number 4, it says, if for some extraordinary reason, for the good of AA as a whole, a member thinks it desirable to completely drop his anonymity, he should only do so after consulting the older members of his local group. If he is to make a nationwide public appearance as an AA, the matter ought to be referred to our central office. Okay, so that I believe changed. I don't think Bill has said you can break your anonymity if the group elders say so since 1945. I think he became even more strict with his beliefs, because, and it's not like, the reason isn't always because you just don't want somebody giving AA a black eye. That's not always the reason. The other reason is to do something very, very unhumble, is corrosive to one's spiritual condition, and it can cause the person doing it great harm. Remember, I told you the guy that keeps track of the anonymity breakers.
Right.
You can go to Vegas on the odds they're going to drink. So sometimes there's multiple reasons for adhering to these traditions.
Yeah.
Of course, I am not for a moment thinking of these statements as rules or regulations. They merely suggest what we would seem to be sound tradition for the future. In the last analysis, every AA will have to search his own conscience. And again, these traditions are not laws. These are best practices. And we have found that the groups and the people that follow these spiritual principles seem to do much better than the groups or people that don't. So are we going to police this? Are we going to take punitive action against people who break their anonymity or groups that do things wrong? No. The problem usually takes care of itself. The problem, alcohol usually takes care of the problem, unfortunately.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've seen that happen so often. Something will look like a storm coming through a group, and when people just settle down and take a breath and trust the process, it just works out. I mean, I know a group, I think I told you, that's been around before the traditions were even written, and this group has gone through some horrible experiences as well as some magnificent ones, and it's still here.
Sure. I belonged to a home group for years that was started in the early 40s. And we had lost track of who the members were in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s. They weren't even part of the history or memory of the group. But the group was still chugging along.
Yeah.
And they generally followed all the traditions, and they generally followed good format procedures and good group dynamics, and they never let anybody get out of control or do irreparable damage to the group. And I saw all kinds of things there.
Yeah, sure.
But the group is still there. It's still chugging along. If we are going to evolve a clear-cut tradition about anonymity, we shall do it only through our usual process: trial and error, much discussion, collective judgment, and common consent. To stimulate further discussion, I would like, in an early issue of the Grapevine, to review our experience with anonymity. That we shall eventually come up with the right answers, I can have no doubt. So this is funny. This is 1945. The 12 and 12, the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions was published in 1952 or something?
Yeah.
So this was an early evolution of Bill's thinking and Bill's philosophy, and an early development of his philosophy about the anonymity tradition. And I really enjoyed reading that tonight.
Yeah. It's just amazing material. And again, I cannot stress enough, listeners. If you're tuning in and you've never listened to one of these workshops that we've done, I'm so glad you have, because there's such rich history. It's fascinating stuff to read. And, I know I understand things the more I learn about them, right? And what a great way to learn is to go through this literature and other pieces of material that has crossed the paths of folks in Alcoholics Anonymous. I appreciate you doing this with us, brother. It's always such an important thing, and I want people to understand you can get this book. You can actually get it in large print, right, Chris? Yeah.
I have it in large print.
You have it in large print. You can get this book, The Language of the Heart. You can go to Amazon. You might be able to get it at your home group or in your district somewhere. There's a hard copy version. There's a paperback. I encourage you to go ahead and get it, and then you can read along with this as well. I'm not sure, but there's probably a PDF online of it as well. It's entitled The Language of the Heart, Bill W.'s Grapevine Writings. All right. Well, next week, our anonymity is both inspiration and safety. That is the article next week. Any closing thoughts, Chris?
I'm really enjoying this. I'm learning as I'm reading this stuff. I purposely have not read this before we do the show because I want to experience this writing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if I would pre-read it, I'd figure out what I'm going to say and all that. So if there's anybody that's listening to this and is experiencing this with us, understand that we're experiencing it too.
Yeah.
And we don't speak for any 12-step fellowship, and our word is not the only word out there.
Right.
Get your own experience with this stuff is what I would basically say.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you'd like to comment on the shows on any of our podcasting platforms, you can email us at take12radio. That's take the number 12 radio at comcast.net. If you're listening to the audio on YouTube, you can comment on our YouTube channel as well. And you can find all those connections at take12radio.com on your internet dial, as well as other workshops, Walking Through the Big Book and Walking Through the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, also with our friend Chris S. as well. Just click on Recovery Workshops and it'll take you right there. All right, my brother, thank you so much once again.
Hey, this was fun.
All right. Until our next broadcast, my friends, this is the Monty'man along with Chris S., and we are wishing God's perfect serenity for you. For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Monty'man, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof.